They laughed at my hobby like it was a little joke, like it was something lonely people did when they didn't have anything better going on. But the night they stopped laughing was the night I realized they hadn't changed. They were just hungry. And what they wanted wasn't my hobby. It was what my hobby had found. Because when they finally said, "Hey, can we talk?" Their smiles were too wide, their voices too careful, and their eyes kept drifting, not to me, but to the locked cabinet behind my desk. And that's when my stomach dropped, because inside that cabinet wasn't money. It was something worse, something that made people greedy, something that made people dangerous. And by the time I understood what was really happening, I was already being watched. My hobby wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a side hustle. It wasn't one of those things people brag about online with perfect lighting and captions about grind and hustle. Mine was quiet, old, the kind of thing you do alone at a table with a lamp while the rest of the world sleeps. I restored books, not rare first editions or museum pieces, just damaged ones. Thrift store paperbacks with cracked spines, books with water stains and dog-eared pages, books that smelled like basements and time. I loved taking something everyone else had written off and giving it another chance, carefully separating pages that had stuck together, pressing warped covers flat, stitching spines so clean you couldn't tell they'd ever been broken. I didn't do it to sell them. I did it because it felt peaceful, like the noise of the world couldn't reach me at that table. But my neighbors didn't see peaceful. They saw strange. They saw pointless. They saw something worth laughing at, especially the group across the street, the loud ones, the kind of people who treated their front porch like a stage. They noticed everything, and they made sure I noticed them noticing. It started with comments when I carried boxes inside. "Got more dusty junk for your library?" Then laughter. One night, while I was taking out the trash, I heard someone call out behind me, "Hey, you restoring those books so you can read them to ghosts?" More laughter. I smiled politely and kept walking. But something about it stuck. Not because it hurt my feelings, because it was deliberate. They wanted me to feel small, so I stopped talking about my hobby, stopped answering questions, kept the curtains closed, and for a while, it stayed mine. Until the night I found the book. It came from an estate sale I almost skipped. Rain was coming down hard that day, the kind that keeps people home, and the house still smelled like whoever had lived there. Lavender, old furniture polish, and something faintly metallic. The books were stacked in a corner like they'd been forgotten. Nothing special at first. Then I saw it, a slim book wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. No title, no author, just a wax seal pressed into the knot. I should have left it alone. That's what my brain said. But my hands didn't listen. I bought the entire box for $20 and took it home. I didn't open the wrap book right away. I set it aside like it might bite. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I loosened the string. The wax seal cracked softly. Inside was a book bound in dark leather. Not decorative, just worn, soft, like it had been handled too many times. When I opened it, the room felt different. The air felt heavier. The first page wasn't printed. It was handwritten. Neat. Careful. A list of names, dates, addresses, symbols beside each entry, like records, like a ledger. Then I noticed the folded note pressed between the pages. Written on the outside were the words, "If you found this, close it." I didn't. Of course I didn't. I should have closed it. That's the part people always say afterward. But curiosity has a way of sounding reasonable when you're alone. I told myself it was just a journal, someone's records, something old and dramatic, nothing more. I turned the page. More names, more dates, every entry written in the same careful hand, like whoever made them believed precision mattered. Some pages were smudged, like they'd been handled too often. Others were crisp, untouched. As I flipped through, I noticed something strange. The later entries felt closer, not in distance, in time. The handwriting was darker, the pressure heavier, like the person writing had been in a hurry. Then I saw it, a faint indentation on the page beneath the ink, as if someone had pressed down hard while writing something else. I reached for a pencil and gently shaded over the paper. Letters appeared. An address. My address. That's when the room went very quiet, and for the first time since I brought the book home, I felt certain I wasn't alone anymore. I stared at the address until my eyes started to blur. My address, written faintly into the page like it had been pressed there before the ink ever touched the paper. I checked it again, then a third time, hoping I'd misread it. I hadn't. Every number was right. Every letter. I closed the book slowly and sat back in my chair, listening to the house around me. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, the faint sound of a car passing outside. Normal sounds that suddenly felt too loud, like they were trying too hard to convince me everything was fine. I told myself there had to be an explanation. An estate sale, old records, someone writing down addresses decades ago. Coincidences happen, but the longer I sat there, the thinner that explanation felt, like paper stretched until you can almost see through it. I locked the book in the metal cabinet beneath my desk and slid the key into my pocket, not because I thought it would stop anything, but because it made me feel less exposed. That night, I didn't really sleep. I drifted in and out, waking at every creak, every shift of the house settling. Once I was sure I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. When I finally checked the clock, it was just after 3 in the morning. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how long that address had been sitting inside that book. Waiting. Morning didn't bring relief. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the street wake up. Across the road, the neighbors were already outside, gathered on their porch like they always were, laughing, talking, too loud for the hour. Nothing about them looked different, but I watched them longer than usual. One of them noticed. He lifted his coffee mug in my direction, grinning like it was a joke between us. I stepped back from the window and pulled the curtain closed. The rest of the day dragged. I tried to work on another restoration project, a paperback I'd been repairing for weeks, but my hands kept pausing. My eyes kept drifting toward the cabinet. Around midday, my phone buzzed. A notification from the neighborhood group chat. Someone had posted a picture of an old trunk they'd found at a garage sale. The caption read, "Anyone know if old books are worth anything? Asking for a friend." There were laughing reactions underneath. Too many. My stomach tightened. I didn't reply. I muted the chat and set my phone face down on the table. That evening, I double-checked my locks, then checked them again. I told myself I was being paranoid until I heard footsteps outside, slow ones, not passing by, stopping. I moved carefully toward the window and peeked through the edge of the curtain. Someone stood at the edge of my yard, just outside the property line, hands in their pockets, facing my house. They didn't come closer. They didn't knock. They just stood there, head tilted slightly like they were listening for something. After a long moment, they turned and walked away. I stood there long after they were gone, my heart hammering. That was the first time I admitted the truth to myself. Whatever that book was, someone else knew it was missing, and they weren't laughing anymore. I waited a long time before moving again, long enough for my breathing to slow, long enough for the house to feel like it belonged to me again. Then I went straight to the cabinet. I unlocked it and pulled the book back out, resting it on the desk without opening it. Just touching the cover made my skin prickle. I thought about the note, about the warning, about the way the address had been pressed into the page like it hadn't been meant to be permanent, like it had been written, erased, and written again. I flipped through the pages more carefully this time, The names weren't random. They followed a pattern. Each entry had a date beside it, sometimes followed by a small mark, sometimes not. Some entries stopped abruptly. Others continued for years. What bothered me most was the last page. It wasn't finished. The final line had a name written halfway, the ink trailing off as if the pen had been lifted suddenly. Below it, there was space. Too much space, as if the book had been waiting. I closed it and locked it away again, my hands shaking as I turned the key. That night, I turned on every outside light. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. But when I lay down, I kept picturing that figure at the edge of my yard. Not curious, not lost, waiting. Sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed again. A private message this time. No name, just a blank profile. The message was short. Nice collection. My chest tightened. Before I could respond, another message appeared. Some things aren't meant to be restored. Then nothing. I stared at the screen until it went dark. I didn't sleep after that. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the message over and over in my head. Nice collection. Some things aren't meant to be restored. By morning, the street felt different. Not louder, quieter, like everyone was awake, but pretending not to be. I made coffee and stood at the window longer than usual. Across the street, the neighbors were already outside, but they weren't laughing. They weren't talking over each other. They stood in small clusters, voices low, heads close together. One of them glanced toward my house, then another. I stepped back from the window. The knock came just before noon, not loud, not aggressive, careful. I froze. The knock came again, exactly the same, measured. I checked the camera feed on my phone. It was one of them, the ringleader. Standing alone on my porch, hands visible, posture relaxed like he was trying very hard not to look threatening. I considered not answering. I almost didn't. But then he spoke through the door. "Hey, I know you're home." Not loud, not angry, certain. I opened the door just enough to speak. "What do you want?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just to talk." I didn't open the door any wider. He glanced past me, into the house, like he was cataloging what he could see. "You're into books," he said casually. "Old ones." I didn't answer. He nodded to himself. "Funny thing," he continued. "People laugh at hobbies until they realize there's value in them." I felt my jaw tighten. "I don't know what you're talking about." His smile faltered for a moment. Then he leaned closer to the doorframe. "We saw you bring one in," he said, "from that estate sale." My heart kicked hard. "I don't sell anything," I said. "I didn't say sell," he replied quickly. Too quickly. There was a pause. He straightened up, smoothing his jacket. "Look," he said, "no hard feelings. We were thinking maybe partnerships." I almost laughed. "Partnerships in what?" He shrugged. "Collecting, restoring, whatever it is you do." I shook my head. "No." The word felt small but solid. His expression changed, not angry, annoyed, like I'd broken a rule he hadn't told me about. "That's a shame," he said, "because some people are very interested in what you have." "I don't have anything," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled again, wider this time. "We'll see." He stepped back from the door. As he walked away, he added casually, without turning around, "By the way, you might want to check your locks." I closed the door and locked it immediately. My hands were shaking. I went straight to the cabinet, unlocked it, opened it. The book was gone. For a second, my brain refused to process it. I checked again. The shelf, the drawer, the hollow dictionary, nothing. The cabinet was empty. My stomach dropped. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. Same blank profile. Just one line. Too slow. And that's when I understood something far worse than the book being stolen. They hadn't taken it last night. They'd taken it while I was standing at my door. I stood there staring at my phone, my pulse thudding so hard it felt like it was shaking my hands. Too slow. They hadn't forced their way in. They hadn't broken anything, which meant they knew exactly where to look, exactly what they were taking. I moved through the house methodically, checking doors, windows, corners that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Nothing else was missing, just the book. That was worse, because it meant this wasn't random. This was precise. I checked the camera footage, rewound it slowly. The ringleader left my porch, walked down the steps, paused, then without hesitation turned back. He never knocked again. He stepped out of frame. Seconds later, the back camera triggered. Someone already inside the yard, already moving like they belonged there. I watched myself on the footage, standing at the door, talking, distracted. While behind me a shadow crossed the yard, the clip ended before I could see their face. I shut off the screen. My chest felt tight. Not panic, not yet. Something colder, understanding. They hadn't come for permission. They'd come to confirm. That night, the street filled with quiet activity, cars stopping briefly, engines idling, voices carried low through open windows. Across the street, lights flicked on and off. Doors opened and closed. They weren't celebrating. They were nervous, like people who had touched something they didn't fully understand. I sat at my desk, staring at the empty space where the book had been. That's when it hit me. They thought they'd won. They thought taking it ended this. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't read the note. They didn't see the address. And they didn't realize. The book wasn't the danger. It was the warning. The next morning, the street didn't wake up normally. No laughter, no music drifting from open windows. Even the usual traffic felt muted, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. I stood at the window and watched. Across the street, the neighbors gathered again, but this time their movements were sharp, restless. They weren't relaxed. They were arguing. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Hands were waving. Faces were tight. Someone slammed a door hard enough to rattle glass. They knew. Whatever excitement they'd felt the night before had burned off. In its place was something heavier. Regret. I stayed inside all morning, not hiding, waiting. Around noon, a black SUV rolled slowly down the street. No logos, no plates I recognize. It didn't stop at my house. It stopped across the street. The ringleader came out first, his confidence gone, shoulders hunched like he was carrying weight he hadn't expected. Two people stepped out of the SUV. Calm, efficient, the kind of calm that doesn't come from being unafraid. It comes from being in control. They spoke quietly. The ringleader gestured toward his house, toward the door, toward the inside. One of the visitors shook their head, said something short, final. The ringleader's face went pale. He ran a hand through his hair and laughed once, sharp and hollow. He pointed down the street, toward my house. I stepped back from the window. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I didn't answer. It buzzed again, then stopped. A moment later, a knock echoed through my house. Not at my door, at my back door. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move. The knock came again. Then a voice, calm, professional. "We know you're home." Not a threat, a statement. I walked to the door and spoke through it. "What do you want?" A pause, then, "We need to ask you a few questions." "I don't have anything," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "You had it," the voice replied. "And then you didn't." My stomach tightened. "We're not here about the book," they continued. "We're here about what it recorded." I felt cold, because that wasn't what I expected. "What do you mean?" I asked. Silence, then, "May we come in?" "No." The answer came out before I could soften it. The door handle turned slightly, not opening, testing. Then it stopped. "That's fine," the voice said calmly. We can talk out here. I leaned against the door, heart pounding. You found something, they continued, something that doesn't belong to any one person. I didn't steal anything, I said. A faint sound on the other side, almost like a smile. No, the voice agreed. You restored it. The word landed hard. Which means you saw things, they went on. Things most people never notice. I swallowed. Your neighbors made a mistake, the voice said. They thought possession meant ownership. And you, I asked. A pause, then, we think possession is temporary. My phone buzzed again. A message appeared on the screen. From the blank profile, just one sentence. They're at your door now. The voice outside spoke at the same time. We need to know, they said quietly, what you remember. And that was when I realized this wasn't about the book anymore. It was about me. I stayed pressed against the door long after the voice fell silent. I could hear movement outside, not pacing, positioning, the kind of movement that told me they weren't leaving. Across the street, I heard raised voices, shouting now, panic bleeding through whatever confidence the neighbors had started with. A door slammed. Another voice yelled something sharp and desperate. Then it stopped. The sudden quiet was worse. My phone buzzed again. A new message from the blank profile. They're lying to you. I stared at the words. Before I could think of a response, another message appeared. They didn't tell you what the last entries were. My throat went dry. Outside, the voice returned, closer to the door. We don't want to alarm you, they said, but your neighbors aren't handling this well. What does that mean? I asked. It means, the voice replied evenly, they don't understand what they took. A pause. And they don't understand what it marked. I closed my eyes. Marked. That ledger wasn't about profit, the voice continued. It was about patterns, repetition, confirmation. My pulse thudded in my ears. You repaired it, they said, which means you saw the order of things. You saw what comes next. I shook my head even though they couldn't see me. I didn't finish reading it, I said. Another pause, then, quieter. You read enough. Something heavy brushed the door. Not a knock, not a push. A reminder. We're not here to punish you, the voice said. We're here because the sequence has resumed. I didn't ask what they meant by the sequence. Somehow I already knew it wasn't something you wanted explained. I stood there with my back against the door, listening to my own breathing, replaying the words in my head. The sequence has resumed. Not started, not triggered, resumed. Like something that had been paused, or interrupted, or forgotten. How long has it been going? I asked. There was a moment of quiet on the other side of the door. Then the voice answered, longer than any of us. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My legs didn't feel steady anymore. The book wasn't a ledger, the voice continued. At least not the way you think of one. What was it then? I asked. A record of outcomes, they said. Of moments when certain conditions lined up. I closed my eyes. The names, the dates, the addresses. What kind of conditions? I asked. People who restore things, the voice replied. People who take what's broken and put it back together. That landed harder than anything else they'd said. You think that's rare, they continued. It isn't. What's rare is when one of them finds the book. My throat went dry. And when they do, I asked. Another pause. They become the marker, the voice said. I thought about the indentation. My address pressed into the page like it had always belonged there. The sequence doesn't follow people, the voice continued. It follows patterns. Certain actions lead to certain responses. Responses from who? I asked. The answer came softer. From us. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. So you're saying this is all some kind of test? No, the voice said. It's closer to a balance. My neighbors' faces flashed through my mind. Their laughter, their greed, their panic. They weren't supposed to take it, the voice said. They broke the order. And I didn't? I asked. You repaired it, they replied. That counts as participation. The word hung there. Participation. What happens now? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Now, the voice said, we observe what you do next. I stood up slowly. You're watching me, I said. Yes. And if I walk away, I asked. Silence. Then, honestly, the sequence adjusts. I looked around my house, my desk, my tools, my quiet little hobby that had never hurt anyone. You don't sound worried, I said. We're not, the voice replied. You haven't made the wrong choice yet. That was when I understood the worst part. There was a right choice, which meant there was also a wrong one. And my neighbors, I asked. They've already been recorded, the voice said. They're no longer relevant. I swallowed. What about me? Another pause, then. That depends on whether you continue restoring things or stop. The door handle clicked softly, not opening, just enough to remind me they could. We'll be in touch, the voice said. Their footsteps faded. I stood there long after they were gone, staring at the door, the silence, the empty space where the book had been. And I realized something I hadn't considered before. The book wasn't meant to be kept. It was meant to be found. And now that the sequence had resumed, it was waiting to see what I would fix next. I stayed where I was for a long time after they left. The house felt smaller, not cramped, watched, like the walls had learned something about me I didn't know yet. I went to my desk and sat down, staring at the tools laid out in their careful order. Bone folder, needles, thread, things I'd used 100 times without thinking. I picked up a damaged book from the corner of the table. Nothing special, a loose spine, pages pulling away from the binding. Normally, I would have fixed it without hesitation. That night I hesitated. I thought about what they'd said. Participation, patterns, balance. My hands hovered over the book, unsure for the first time whether repairing it was an act of kindness or something else entirely. I set it back down. Outside, a car passed slowly, too slowly. Headlights lingered across my window before moving on. I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. But the silence felt intentional, like they were giving me space, letting me decide. I realized then that the book had never been the point. It was a signal, a way to identify people like me, people who couldn't help but fix what was broken. The sequence didn't need the ledger anymore. It had me. And whatever came next wouldn't be written down first. It would be watched, measured, judged. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, staring at my hands. Because the question wasn't whether the sequence would continue, it was whether I would. I didn't fix anything for 2 days. That alone felt wrong. The books on my desk sat untouched, their loose pages and broken spines quietly accusing me every time I walked past. I kept waiting for another message, another knock, another reminder that I was being watched. Nothing came. On the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked one up, a small hardcover I'd found months earlier, its binding split clean down the middle. Nothing rare, nothing important, just broken. I told myself it didn't matter, that one repair couldn't possibly change anything, that I wasn't agreeing to anything just by doing what I'd always done. I worked slowly, carefully, every stitch deliberate, and as the spine came back together, I felt it. Not a sound, not a voice, a shift, like pressure equalizing in a sealed room. My phone buzzed before I could set the book down. One message, blank profile. No deviation detected. My hands went cold. I set the book aside and stepped back from the table. That should have been the end of it. But an hour later, the neighborhood erupted. Sirens, shouting, doors slamming. I went to the window. Across the street, police lights washed over the ringleader's house in red and blue. An ambulance idled at the curb. Paramedics moved fast, focused, too practiced. Someone was being loaded onto a stretcher. I recognized the shoes. The ringleader's wife stood on the lawn, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly. The neighbors whispered in clusters, fear written across every face. I didn't need to ask what happened. I already knew. My phone buzzed again. They were unstable variables. I sank into the chair. You repaired, the message continued. The sequence compensated. Like this was math. Like this was balance. I typed back before I could stop myself. What happens if I stop? The reply came almost instantly. Then imbalance spreads. I stared at the screen. And if I keep going? I typed. A pause. Longer this time. Then the damage localizes. I looked back at the desk, at the unfinished repairs waiting quietly for my hands. I thought about my neighbors, about laughter turning to panic, about how quickly people became variables. That night I fixed 3 books. Each one felt heavier than the last, and each time my phone stayed silent. No alerts, no confirmations, no praise, just quiet. The next morning the street was different, calmer, too calm. The neighbors avoided my house entirely, wouldn't meet my eyes, wouldn't come close. They didn't know why. They just knew something had shifted. I stood in my doorway watching them scatter like they were afraid of disturbing something. That was when the truth finally settled in. The sequence didn't punish me for fixing things. It rewarded me by letting everyone else pay the price instead. And now I understood the real cost. If I stopped, everything broke. If I continued, only certain things did. And I was the one deciding what those things were. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. There was no point. How do you explain that the street felt safer because something invisible was being managed? That peace had a cost, and it wasn't evenly distributed? I kept my routine small: repair a book, wait, watch. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No sirens, no messages, just the quiet settling back into the neighborhood like dust after something collapses. Then I noticed the pattern. Every time I repaired something, the tension eased. Arguments stopped mid-sentence. People who had been spiraling suddenly stabilized. But when I went a day without fixing anything, little things went wrong. A car accident at the corner, a fight that turned physical, an ambulance that stayed longer than it should have. The sequence didn't announce itself. It nudged, corrected, balanced, and I was the correction. I tried to cheat it once. I picked up a book and pretended to repair it, threaded the needle, lined up the pages, did everything except make the first stitch. That night someone's house caught fire. No one died, but they lost everything. My phone buzzed once. Partial action does not register. I sat at my desk shaking. There was no opting out. There was no half measure. I wasn't being punished. I was being calibrated. By the end of the week, my hands ached constantly. Not from the work, from the weight of knowing what happened when I stopped. I realized something else too. The book hadn't been a warning. It had been a filter, a way to find someone who wouldn't walk away once they understood the stakes. Someone who would keep fixing things even when fixing them hurt. I looked at my tools again, at the quiet precision they demanded, and I understood the final truth of the sequence. It didn't need obedience, it needed consent. And without ever saying yes out loud, I'd already given it. I thought consent would feel louder, like a moment, a choice you could point to and say, that was it. But it didn't. It felt quiet, routine, like setting an alarm you never planned to turn off. Days passed, then weeks. I kept repairing books, one a day, sometimes 2, if the tension in the neighborhood felt thick enough to taste. I stopped watching the news, stopped checking the group chat. I didn't need updates anymore. I could feel when something was about to tip. My hands would start to ache before anything happened. A dull pressure in my wrists. A warning. When I ignored it once, deliberately, someone 2 streets over had a heart attack. He lived. Barely. That night my phone buzzed. No explanation. Just confirmation. Delay increases collateral. I never ignored the ache again. People started treating me differently. Not openly. Not in ways they could explain. But conversations would trail off when I walked by. Eyes followed me longer than they should. Neighbors crossed the street rather than past my house. They didn't know why. They just knew instinctively that something about me didn't belong to them anymore. The outsiders never came back in person. They didn't need to. Sometimes I'd find a message waiting when I finished a repair. Stability improving, or deviation contained. Once after a long night when my hands were shaking too badly to hold the needle steady, I typed a question I'd been avoiding. Is there an end to this? The reply took longer than usual. No, it finally said. There is only transfer. That sat with me for a long time. Transfer meant replacement. It meant someone else, someday, would find the book, restore it, understand just enough, and take my place. The idea should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like another responsibility. I started choosing repairs more carefully. Not the ones that interested me, the ones that mattered. Books with histories, with margins full of notes, with spines that had been broken and repaired before. I learned what kind of fixes quieted what kind of chaos. Some repairs eased violence, others softened despair. Once, after restoring a book that had passed through 5 hands before mine, the entire street slept through the night without a single siren. That morning the air felt lighter, like the world had exhaled. I stood at my table and looked at my tools, at the simple things that now carried weight I couldn't put down. I thought about the person I'd been before the book, before the laughter, before the watching. I realized something then. This wasn't a curse, and it wasn't a gift. It was a function. Someone had to do the work. Someone always does. I threaded the needle again, pulled the pages together, and made the next stitch. Careful, precise, because the sequence hadn't chosen me by accident. It had chosen me because I wouldn't stop. And somewhere beneath layers of paper and thread and quiet decisions, the world was holding, waiting to see what I fixed next. I don't talk about the book anymore, not because I'm afraid someone will ask, but because no one ever does. People sense when a story doesn't want to be told. The laughter never came back to this street. Neither did the chaos. Things break less often now. When they do, they break quietly, manageably. I still restore books at the same table, under the same lamp. The work looks the same to anyone watching. Thread through paper, spine reinforced, damage erased. But I know better. Every repair is a choice. Every choice redirects something unseen. The outsiders were right about one thing. The book was never meant to be kept. It was meant to teach, to show someone the pattern, to reveal what happens when broken things are ignored and what happens when they aren't. Someday someone else will find it. Not because I'm done, but because that's how the sequence works. It doesn't end. It passes. Until then, I stay. I mend what I can. I absorb what I must. And when the world tilts too far in one direction, I pull it back, one careful stitch at a time, beneath the bindings.